last time we began our discussion of organizational communication. What kind of messages actually take place in an organization? What are some types of messages that occur? We talked about upward and downward and horizontal, but in reality, what does that mean? Who talks to whom?
You talk to your superior.
Okay, you talk to your superior talks to you. How do they do that? What kind of channels do they use? Do they phone you? Sometimes. Okay, memos, email. Okay, let's just take a look at a few here just to kind of get a feel for this. There may be memos, and I drew the arrows kind of in the direction, in my opinion, that they usually go, but a staff meeting obviously can have upward communication as well as downward. Meetings, you get a lot of upward flow of information. A grievance system for sure is designed to move the message upward to the superiors. A social event is probably both ways, but probably a little more upward. You don't have to memorize which way they go, you know, whether it's mostly upward or downward. But I just want you to have a feel for translating this into the specifics. You know, there are letters, there are bulletin boards, there are memos, interviews, phone calls, email, fax, all kinds of messages that are moving within the organization. And as we determined yesterday, those messages move upward, they move downward, they move horizontally. And the messages that move upward and downward indicate or reflect who's in control, how much hierarchy there is in the organization, how many levels there are in that hierarchy. The lateral communication reflects coordination, reflects the equality within the organization, but is important for efficiency, for expediting matters, so that managers don't become overloaded and so forth. Okay, as we were closing our last class, we asked the question of what your managerial style is. Do you see yourself as, or do you see people rather, as being lazy or industrious, creative, or whatever? And we won't ask for true confession time at this point, but if you haven't thought about this already, think about what your view of people is, because that viewpoint is going to determine which of two broad camps you fall into, according to Douglas McGregor, who gave us a theory called Theory X, which is also referred to as classical theory, and Theory Y, which is referred to as human relations theory. The Theory X style manager is the one that says people are lazy, that you need to coerce them, you got to watch them all the time, you got to walk through the factory or go down the hall or whatever and pay attention and you know, really monitor what's going on with these folks. The Theory Y, and for a long time this classical approach was the only approach. And then, I don't know, I can't remember if it was in the 50s, early 60s, along in there. But anyway, there were some Hawthorne studies, which is the little name of them. The managers went in, owners went in, and they painted the walls in the factory, put in better lighting, painted the place, and productivity went up. And that caused them to say, what's going on here? You know, we've not done anything that's in this task orientation, coercive kind of orientation. All we did was paint the walls and improve the lighting. But because the workers perceived that as something being done for them, as their interest being taken into account, productivity went up. And that gave rise to then this Theory Y, as McGregor called it, or the human relations approach to managerial style. That in turn laid the foundation then for an assortment of managerial styles that blends those two concepts. Now Likert gave us 4 systems and that should be Blake instead of Black up there. We got a typo. Blake and MHAUN gave us a grid. Let's look first of all at the four classifications that Likert developed. His first is exploitative authoritative. Now that one's a mouthful and frequently misspelled on exams. You might think of this person as the mean dictator. We're going to get the nice, benevolent dictator next. But here the decisions are made by the executive. There's no use of feedback. We got the lion here saying, I'm the king and I say that deer is for dinner. That's all. Oh, that reminds me, a little sidebar comment today. Remember we had an example with honeybees yesterday in our last class, your last tape, whatever. Okay, and I didn't catch the reference initially in there to the guys, but one of our students was kind enough to point out to me that all worker bees are females. So just for the record, those bees on the slide are females, and they're just saying guys because they're from California or something. Okay, all right. So anyway, now we all know worker bees are female. Okay, the exploitative, authoritative approach, though, is one in which the manager, the CEO, the person in charge, the superior, is making the decisions without input from the other people. Okay, now there's also what Likert calls benevolent authoritative. And here, the manager still makes the decisions unilaterally. But we've moved over a notch on the continuum because in this case the manager is more sensitive to the needs of the worker. So here we've got the manager saying, we need more food, but I know you're all tired, so you can have a break. And they're saying, thank you, sir. Oh, I love you, sir, so forth. But in reality, what you've got is a nicer person here who is not only taking into account their own personal interest or the interest of the company, but they're taking into account the interest of the workers as well. Okay, consultative. In this case, the authority figure still maintains control, but they get a lot of consultation from the people below them. So here one says, we're going to eat burgers, but I want to know which ones. What do you think what do you all think are the good burgers? And so you're getting plugs here for various chains and all. But there are a lot of managers who function this way. I think a lot of my parenting style was like this. Mom is still, unless mom and dad conflict, and then we have to go negotiate it in the other room and come back out, But we'll make the decision, but we're at least interested in input. Give me some good reasons why you should spend the weekend, girls, why you should spend the weekend in Galveston. Give me some reasons why we should spend money on these clothes or another car or whatever it might be, rather than just unilaterally making the decision. So, and you know many instances of presidents, CEOs who have some sort of staff advisory board that regularly gives them input before they make decisions. So that's further over on this continuum. And then the fourth type that is identified by Likert is the participative style. And in this case, the workers participate fully in the decision making. Okay, well, Sam, the VP, is saying, guys, what do you want for the office party? Music, dancing, food. And that's going to all be fine because this is a participative style manager. In a more realistic setting, it may be a situation where the boss says, we've got 7 employees in this little company. I've got $10,000 for Christmas bonuses. I want you all to tell me how it should be divided. Of course, that'll make for a real antagonistic event probably. But nevertheless, it's a case where whether it's dividing money or rearranging offices, whatever the decision is that needs to be made, in the participative style, the workers, the subordinates, are the ones who are engaged in that, and they make the decision, and the manager goes with that decision, whatever it may be. Okay, Likert also talks to us about kinds of variables that we find in systems, and there are causal variables. These are independent variables that can be changed or altered, maybe like the salary scale. There are intervening variables. These lead to results and reflect the internal state or health of the system. And then there are end result variables, the outputs or dependent variables, that reflect the organizational health. Okay, can you think of anything that might be classified as an intervening variable? Something, or can you think of an end variable? Okay, well, some end state variables or end result variables, either works, are outputs that reflect the organizational health. How do you know if a company is healthy or not? It's making money. That's a big one right there. How's it doing on the New York Stock Exchange this morning? Okay, that's an important end variable. Is it growing? Is it making profits? Okay, then what would some intervening variables be? What are some things that cause it to grow or not grow? I can't hear you. Sales. Okay. Internal to the organization, you might find absenteeism, employee turnover, job satisfaction. Okay. If you have a high rate of absenteeism, then there's a reasonable probability that you'll have negative outcomes from that. You know, the profits won't be as great as they could be. The people won't be as satisfied as they might be. So anyway, if you're taking organizational communication, then you can spend a whole semester exploring a variety of things, which includes looking at these kinds of variables and how they impact the organizations. We don't want to bog down in that at this point. Okay. If a manager has high goals and manages, uses direct pressure for results, here's some causal value variables. It better be done or do your best. Whether it's a coercive or supportive kind of environment, those would be intervening variables. Okay, and then there's some organizational outcomes, group loyalty, performance goals, all of those kinds of things are end results that or will produce end results. And here's your lower sales volume, lower cost, and so on. Okay, we're going to look next at Blake and Mouton, Blake and Mouton, who expand again on these 4 managerial styles and actually come up with a 9 by 9 grid. We can look over here at my bad artwork here for just a minute before we get into this. Okay. What they've done is develop 2 continuums of tasks, and I couldn't figure out how to draw this into the computer, so maybe someday we'll get a real slide on it. Okay. But they looked at task and they looked at people, and the manager's concern for task and the manager's concern for people. And so down here at this little bottom corner, if there's low concern for task, low concern for people, you've got a 1-1. And if you've got someone up here at this upper corner with high concern for task, high concern for people, they would be a 9-9. Now in just a minute on the slides we're going to look at some of those profiles, but I wanted you to have this grid notion in your head as well. So out here in the middle, if I found the middle box, you would have a 5-5, 6-6, 7-7, 8-8. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we look at some of these particular profiles, because it's addressing the balance between these two, and 1 is obviously low, 9 is high. So if you have a 1-9 profile, and for test purposes I want you to use the names, don't use the numbers, because sometimes you'll see it drawn with task on the side and people on the bottom, and other times people will be on the side and task will be on the bottom. But anyway, more importantly are the labels. Country club management has, as you might expect, high concern for people, low concern for task. High concern for people, low concern for task. Now if you go back to that theory X, theory Y kind of contrast, country club, you take everybody out to play golf, you want lots of socials, you want a happy office environment, maybe we all bring our lunch each day, and we spend a lot of time at the coffee pot, a lot of time socializing with one another. And the attitude of the manager would be that as long as the people are happy, they're going to get the job done. I don't have to worry about the task as long as I take care of my people. Okay? And so that's just for reference as labeled country club. Okay, the opposite extreme from that is the authority. Oh, here's our example. Okay. I really don't care about you guys. Don't worry about the reports. We'll get them done sometime soon. Anything you say, boss. A high concern for people, low concern for task. Okay, in the authority obedience, which is the opposite extreme, there's a high concern for task and a low concern for people. It's just the other extreme. 9.9, up there in that upper right-hand corner, is the team management. High concern for people, high concern for task. Okay, now here's an authority obedience. I don't care if you're tired, you better finish making 5 more cakes by the next hour. I'm so tired I can't go on. Anyway, high concern for task, low concern for people. And so here we've got a mean old head chef, just making the poor little lady cook on and on and on for hours and hours on end. Okay, team management, though, might say something like, I want everything perfect today. I know you guys are going to do a great job. Good luck. They're just balancing the two out. They're working hard, but they're also concerned about the morale of the group. Okay, 5.5, Blake and Mouton called organization man. We could call it organization woman now, too. They developed the model back when there weren't very many women CEOs around. But anyway, this is a moderate balance. This is where you find a lot of managers. It's hard to find the ideal manager that anybody would score up at a 9.9 or even an 8.8. I'm sure they're out there. But 5.5, 6.6, 7.7, these people are good organizational people. They have a balanced sense of what's needed within the group and have a concern for both the people and the job. Now down in that lower left-hand corner, the 1.1 is appropriately labeled impoverished management. Okay, and here there's a low concern for both the task and the people. Okay, if that person, in my opinion, needs to be fired, I'm not even, they're not really worthy of being called manager. Okay, here's some examples of organization, balanced. Just steady, you'll be fine. Moderate concern for people and task. And then the impoverished, I don't care about you. I don't care about your duties. Manager never worries about it and is not taking on the responsibility for either one of those. Okay, and we asked this question before, but now that you've got a little more insight into it, you should be honest with yourself and ask, which managerial style is most characteristic of you and why? And just, always be conscious of where you are on that continuum. Now, you may find that you're not always the same in every context. Okay, I've talked to public school teachers, for example, who have 6 or 7 or sometimes 8 classes a day. And they may find that their style changes from one class to the next. And so that's a reasonable expectation. You may find that the second period class is highly motivated. They're self-starters. They're creative. They're responsible. There may be one or two that need a little thump on the head now and then. But on the whole, it's a great class. You just put the assignment up on the board and they come in and they get busy and they work and they do well. And then third period or fourth period may be that class I was talking about yesterday, last class, when the teacher had to walk around with a ruler, spending half of her time trying to maintain the environment, getting people to settle down, pay attention, and so forth. Okay, we turn next to, the theory is called structural functionalism, and this is the work of Ferrace, Mung, and Russell. They're interested, as the title suggests, in the structure of the organization and in the functions of the different parts within that organization. There is an emphasis on the importance of information, and all semester we've talked about information theory and how information reduces uncertainty. Well, they pull that same theme through in this theory, the importance of the information within the organization. They remind us of the system levels, the hierarchy within the organization, individual, dyadic, group, organizational. You've got those in your workbook notes there, and we've talked about that before, so we won't belabor it here. They're interested in the functions of communication within an organization, and they say that those are three: production, innovation, and maintenance. The organization has to produce things. We talked about systems theory and how systems transform input into output. Well, this production phase is an important communication phase in transforming that input into output, whether it's turning potatoes into potato chips or peanuts into peanut butter, students into graduates, and so forth. Okay, there's also an innovative function. We've said off and on with groups and systems and now organizations that healthy groups maintain themselves and they also adapt and change. Okay, well, innovation in the organization is one of those areas, or is the area where this innovation takes place. And if we had time, again, if you take the organizational whole course, then you can, and probably marketing, some others, you can look at organizations that have created new products and whether those products have held or failed. We'll get to diffusion of innovations a little later on too. And then there are maintenance functions within the organization that are communication functions, just to maintain the organization at the level of okayness, on a day-to-day basis, the routine communications that go on and so forth. Okay, now you can assess the structure of the organization by looking at the patterns of regularities in message transmission. Think about that a minute. You get an important clues to the structure of the organization by looking at the patterns of regularities in message transmission. Because secretaries do certain things, office administrators do certain things, students communicate in certain ways that are different from the ways the faculty communicates, etc. Now, there's some things that we have in common, of course, like ritualistic greetings or leave-taking behaviors. But you can look at this, if you go into the central operating room at a major hospital in the Texas Medical Center, how do you know who the nurses are? How do you know who the doctors are? Sometimes you get some clues by their artifacts and the way that they're dressed, but you also get information by looking at the kinds of messages that are transmitted, because orderlies, secretarial types, RNs, LVNs, MDs, administrators, those people are delivering different kinds of messages from one another, and there's a regularity and a pattern to that. Okay, they also address the notion of individual communication load. You know, how heavy is your communication load? And they say that the load is a function of both rate and complexity. How fast are those messages coming at you? Obviously, that's the rate. How fast are the messages coming? But then how complex are the messages? If somebody's just saying, hi, hello, good to see you, have a good day, you know, you're walking down the hall, those are not complex messages. And you could have a lot of messages that are just ritualistic greetings, and you wouldn't have a very heavy communication load. But if you're in a middle position, administrative position, and you've got people coming in saying, I need this report by 2 o'clock, and it's very complicated, and a fax comes in, and somebody else wants something by 1 o'clock, and the messages that you're getting are all complex, require a lot of sorting for understanding, require a lot of work on your part to understand. See, then you're getting a much more complex load. Okay, so they give us two terms, underload and overload, either of which can be very difficult on the worker, can produce stress, can produce worker burnout. Now, generally we think of stress and burnout as occurring as a result of worker overload. You know, you're just bombarded with so many messages, there's so much stuff to do, it's just heaped up on the desk, I don't even know what to do next. That kind of feeling. Okay, but the opposite extreme can be just as detrimental to workers. When there's underload, there's not enough going on. How are you going to feel when you're a victim of underload? Bored beyond belief. And particularly if you're not allowed to go to sleep or read a novel on the job, you know, you can't even do your nails, ladies, or, you know, entertain yourself in any way, then that's really bad. And generally people who are bored will quit. They'll go find something that's more interesting. Okay, they also identify for us links within the organization. And how do you know when one person is linked to another person? Are you linked to me? Yeah, you're on my roll sheet. You belong to me for another couple of weeks here. Okay? There's a connection there. Now, in your book, you have listed several characteristics: symmetry, strength, reciprocity, content, mode. These are the kinds of things that you look at in order to assess what kind of link you have. Do we agree, you know, reciprocity, do we agree the link is there? Do you believe you're my student and I agree that you're my student? And most of the time we don't have a problem with that, but you know, every once in a while we flag somebody down and say, guess what, your name's not on the roll sheet. Okay, so and you say, but I enrolled in the class. Well, I'm telling you, your name is not on the roll sheet. And that means you can't come until we straighten this out. You know, I don't doubt that it isn't got that sentence backwards. Anyway, I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying your name is not on the official sheet of paper where it should be. Therefore, you won't get a grade in the course if your name is not on the final roll sheet. You need to go get this stuff straightened out. So is there symmetry? Do we see this the same way? Is there reciprocity? Each agrees with the other that the relationship exists. How strong is the relationship? Okay, and in a large class like this one, the links vary. I usually have stronger links to people that I've had in class before. It doesn't have anything to do with grade, but it has to do with whether or not I recognize the person, whether I can put a name with a face. It may have to do with how you identify with me. Well, I've had Han before, you know, I know she gives horrible tests, but at least I know what to expect. See, and those people will tell the people around them, if she tells you study this, you better believe it, and they speak with certain authority and all. The content of the link in the relationship, I talk about very different things with you than I do with my next door neighbors. They could care less. Now, Dr. Williamson and I have already confessed, we're linked on content in this course, and so even in social context, we may discuss course content, research projects, things like that. But the content is an important factor in determining what kind of a link exists. Okay? The mode or the means, why would that make a difference? Any idea? Do you have some friends that are your email friends only? How many of you have people that you only know over email? A few. Okay. Well, I'm on this little international parliamentary chat line. Okay? And it's registered parliamentarians only. And so we think it's really cool. I can see people out there going, oh my gosh, who would want to spend their time on that? But we solve organizational well, they do. I usually just read and listen. I don't have much time to get deeply involved. But there are people that I only know through that chat line. I don't have a clue what they look like. Their name is in the official directory. I know they've paid their dues. I know that they have certain credentials, and therefore I tend to believe what they write. Besides, what they write makes good sense, too. But I mean, it's not just a name that came out of the telephone directory or something. I've got some credentials to go with that. But the mode is through this parliamentary list, okay? And in some instances, I've never met the people. In other instances, we chatted for 2 or 3 years before we finally met at some of these folks I met about a year ago at a conference in Dallas. And it was pretty cool, to finally get the name and the face together. But even though we saw each other that one time, and I now have a mental image to go with that, the link is because of the mode, because of the computer connection. And see, I'm out of the mode right now because of the flood. I've lost that email access going on 3 weeks now. I hesitate to think what the inbox is going to look like once the server functions again. But anyway, all of those things help you determine the nature of the link. Are you linked at the office? Or are you linked over email? I have some people I'm only linked to by my holiday cards. There's some people I exchange Thanksgiving cards with, others Christmas cards. Some are always so slow that we usually end up sending Happy New Year's cards. But greeting cards are our link once a year. And that's, maybe former college roommates, that sort of thing. So defining the link is very important, and understanding what contributes to that link. It also lets you realize that the link becomes vulnerable if you mess with one of these areas. If we stop sending the greeting cards, then that may terminate the link, because that's in that case, that's the primary thing that's maintaining that relationship. In here, for example, we will be well linked until this course is over. But then if you don't enroll in another course with me, the odds are the link is broken, the link is gone. Now, sometimes there are people who come back by to get a piece of candy or do whatever, when the office is functional. And they maintain the link because they come back to visit. Anyway, enough of that. Okay, within the organization then, there are roles that people play based on these kinds of links. Now, you may have an isolate, you may have a bridge, you may have a liaison, you may have a dyad. Let me see where we are here. Okay, I think that slide's out of order. Okay, anyway, here we are at the top of your notes in your workbook if you're following along. We were talking about information uncertainty. Let me just backtrack for a minute here. The absolute information within the organization is the total amount of information that's available. And the distributed information is the information that actually reaches the workers. Okay, and sometimes those two are almost identical, but other times there's a lot of information there that is not distributed throughout the organization. We talked last time about rumors of summer school and whether or not, it would be taught or not taught in any given year. But there are a lot of times that management withholds information and doesn't share that with you. Okay, here are our hierarchies that I mentioned a minute ago: individual, dyadic, group, organizational level, where you have lots of people. Okay, and some examples of that. And we've talked about all of those terms at different points in here throughout the semester. Okay, and we talked about the functions of production, innovation, and maintenance. Okay, and here's some production functions and innovation. Cook the turkey by Monday, okay. Innovate, let's see if I can do something new. Somebody put apples in their turkey one year. I didn't think that was a good innovation. Okay. Okay, we talked about structure, the patterns of regularity in the message transmission. The individual communication function, load, being a function of rate and complexity, overload and underload. Okay, and then here we're back up now on links, the symmetry, the degree to which the members are connected by a link on an equal basis, the strength, the frequency of that interaction. And generally people who communicate more have a stronger link with one another, unless there's some other intervening variable, like we have to communicate a lot but we really don't like each other, so we don't feel the link as much. Okay, reciprocity, the extent to which we agree about our link. Content, just is this social, is it work related? Mode, we talked about that. Okay, here are George and Tim having a little chat. This one's a social link. You and your wife should come over to my house for Friday. It'll be fun. Sure, I'll love that. We'll bring the dessert. Okay, now the roles. There are isolates in the organization. These are the people who do not communicate with others in the network. They might rarely, occasionally. At this point, I usually visualize some research scientist off in the lab, in the inner workings of the research lab. Maybe the secretary drops a box lunch at the door and rings the bell. Now, obviously, everybody talks with somebody sometime, but there are those people who, by comparison, are very much set apart from the other people in the communication network. Okay, there are people that are labeled by Foray, Smung, and Russell as bridges, and the bridges are linked to members of another group. They're in a group, and they're linked to another group. Okay, as a faculty member, let me think, what other group? I'm linked to some professional groups. Okay, all the professional and we won't go into those, but all the professional groups that I belong to provides a linkage there. As the debate coach, the director of the forensics program, I'm linked to forensics programs at other universities across the country and a variety of organizations that are affiliated with those. As a parliamentarian, I'm linked to a number of groups who use my parliamentary services regularly. There's some people that only call me once a year, but I've been doing their annual meetings now for a number of years. So I'm linked to those. There are a couple of civic clubs that use me regularly. Anytime they think there are going to be some hot issues with lots of voting and amending, that sort of thing. So in that sense, I'm a bridge because I'm in one group, but I'm linked to the other groups. Okay, but there are people that we label, Freisman and Russell label, as liaisons who are not members of any group, yet they link 2 or more groups. Okay, in the School of Communication, for example, we have a Women in Communication group. We have a PRSSA, a Student Public Relations group. Probably some other things. We did have a business communication group up there too. I'm not sure they're alive and well, as I say. They kind of come and go depending on who the leadership is. Okay, I don't belong to IABC, the Business Comm group, or PRSSA because that's not my primary field of study. But I know where the offices are. I know who the faculty sponsors are. You know, there are all kinds of campus organizations that you might be interested in. But I can provide liaison service. I can be a liaison between you and that group. Okay? Because I can connect members of the 2 groups. So the bridge is in one group, linked to another group, and the liaison is not a member of the group, yet they still link 2 or more groups. Any question about that one? Okay, sometimes a little fuzzy. Okay, a dyad simply refers to a group of 2 people, and within any organization you're going to find people, you know, you may have a best friend at work, your relationship to the secretary might constitute a dyad. Here's just a kind of number 1 over there on your map is an isolate, not regularly linked to anyone else. Circles 5 and 9 function as bridges because they're in a group and they're linked to another group. And 5 and 9 might even be a dyad. You can't really tell from this diagram. For sure, 2 and 3 constitute a dyad because they're set apart over there. Maybe this is 2 people working on a research project together. And so they spend a lot of time in the same lab or collecting and processing data on the same communication experiment and so forth. Liaison number 13 is not in any of those groups if you assume that 14, 15, and 19 are not a group. It could be or could not be. You'd have to know more about the particular organization and who the people, but for the sake of the diagram, 13 is not in any of those but does link those other groups to each other. Okay, that concludes our study of an overview of organizational theory. Let me pull up MassComm here. And we'll move on into our next unit. If I can click the right little box. We're getting closer. Okay. Okay, you will probably rejoice. This is the last unit of theory this semester. And this area is often the most familiar to you because a number of you have had Communication 1301, the Media and Society course. So some of these things should sound familiar. If you haven't had that class yet, then pay extra special attention to some of these things because there are a number of terms in here that you're going to need as we get into this. First thing we want to do is define mass communication. And obviously enough, this involves the study of mass media. It also involves the messages that they generate, the audiences that they attempt to reach, and their effects on those audiences. So we study mass media, the messages they generate, the audiences that they attempt to reach, and the effects of the media on these audiences. Okay, the earliest model that I'm aware of was the Laswell model back in the 40s. Does this sound familiar at all? Who says what to whom, in what context, with what effect? Where have you heard something similar to that? Got any journalism people out here? What do they tell you to do on a story?
In the lead, tell
Who, what, when, where, why. Okay, those 5 little W's in question, W words, have their root, I think, in this model. Okay, who says what to whom, in what context, in which channel to whom, whatever order you want to do it in, with what effect. Okay, in the mass context, think about how the audiences are different. Okay, the audiences are large, they're heterogeneous. That's very different from the workplace when you go to a staff meeting and maybe you have to stand up and give a report to 15 or 20 other people. It's very different from your classroom environment if you have to stand up and make a speech in a class similar to this one. Even though we've got all these different individuals in the room, there's still a lot of things that you have in common because you're students at U of H. Most of you fall within certain age and demographic parameters, income parameters, intellectual parameters, and so forth. Okay, but in a mass communicated message, you're going to get a lot more people and much, much greater diversity in who those people are, intellectually, socioeconomically, interest, and so forth. Okay, the messages are public, they're open, and they're one way. Now, sometimes somebody actually takes time to email or wire or phone the White House or the network. You know, there's a little bit of feedback that occurs. But by and large, you know, millions of people watch the news, watch certain programming, and never provide any kind of feedback to that. And that's just the difference between mass and non-mass. Sometimes, you know, the line gets fuzzy in there. Do you have a mass audience of 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000? And we won't try to draw that line today, but we'll just work within these parameters. Okay, we know we've got a mass audience when the audiences are anonymous. They're very impersonal. They provide either no feedback or very limited feedback. And electronic technology, as you well know, is what has made all of this possible, has made this rapid transmission of information possible. As far as I know, there weren't any mass audiences in the colonial era. You know, now, I know there were people like George Whitefield some flavor preacher, I don't remember, out in the fields, you know, trying to save great numbers of people. And you might have audiences of several hundred people, maybe even a few thousand on occasions. But that didn't have the massness to it that is possible with the electronic transmission of information. And now with satellite hookups and all that sort of thing, you know, virtually not anybody in the world, but millions of people around the world can watch an event, whether it's the Miss Universe pageant or a State of the Union address or the bombing of Baghdad, etc. And we're linked in a much more different way. Okay, most mass communication messages originate from large organizations rather than from individuals. Now, sometimes you have a Ross Perot buying airtime, and you know there is an individual generating the message, or it's coming from the President of the United States or some other dignitary. But even in that case, it's kind of the country that's generating the message. So most of the time, at least, the mass communication messages are coming from organizations rather than from individuals. Okay, some generalizations that we can make then, that communication does indeed take place in the mass context. It involves public messages from organizational sources sent via the media to the large audiences. That's kind of saying the same thing, but turning it back around, rephrasing it. The mass audience is comprised of many publics with separate response patterns. Now, we'll see this again when we get to Marshall McLuhan, and particularly how cable television has created, I don't know who said this first, I heard it from somebody on our faculty, that we have all these cultural islands out there. We had broadcasting, and now we have narrowcasting as cable zooms in on different, as people select different, the cable doesn't zoom anywhere, but as people choose, some are addicted to the sports network, other people watch the news regularly. There are a few people that I know who leave the Weather Channel on most of the time because they just love watching the weather. Got some frowns in the audience on that one. But it's true, keeps them company while they do their home thing. Okay. The mass messages are diffused by a combination of media and interpersonal sources. And we'll see when we get to diffusion of innovation theory and we get to opinion leaders that, when you hear something on the news, some of you, I don't know, maybe many, it may be some of you repeat that news, or you pick up the phone, or you put your cell phone, whatever, and call somebody and say, did you know such and such has happened on the freeway, mom went off her rocker and killed all her children, the bridge is out at location X. Anyway, those stories that are broadcast get diffused then throughout society because we don't all watch the news at the same time. Now, after the flood, there was a much higher percentage of people sitting in front of their TVs getting it simultaneously. But even then, there were probably people calling each other saying, what channel are you on? Because on this channel, they're showing such and such. And so there may have been some channel hopping as a result of that. Okay, some other generalizations. Media forms, apart from the content, affect society. Okay, and this is going to take us into the work of Marshall McLuhan, who is saying that it's the medium that's the message, and we'll come back to him in more detail. But the medium is the message more importantly than the content itself. Okay, the semiotics people would say it's the content that counts, it's the meaning in the content. But the McLuhan camp says, it really makes a difference whether you're getting the message face-to-face, whether you're getting it over television, whether you're getting it over radio. And so we'll come back to that and look at how those different forms of communication make a difference. Okay, mass communication involves a complex process of symbolic interaction using significant symbolic forms, and as we look at messages, we'll get into that notion more. And the forms relate highly to other significant social forms. For example, what made literacy possible? Have you ever have people always been able to read? No. What did we do before we could read? How do we communicate? Verbal, what reading is verbal? Tell me more. Okay, I'm getting little words out there of songs and stories. We were an oral society. We were a spoken society. Okay, well, what changed us from a society that went around telling stories and having an oral tradition to reading? Okay, the printing press, which generated print, and once you've got all that print, then you need to know how to read, don't you? Okay, so see, that's a place where media form has impacted society. and created a total revolution in the way we communicate with one another. Okay, can you think of another example like that? Okay, she's saying the computers, the internet, everybody needs to get online. Yeah, we've had a technological revolution in the last 20 years or so because of the information age, the computer industry, particularly the introduction of the internet. And so there's a whole new wave throughout at least the societies that are capable of the rapid transmission of information and so forth. We probably still have some cultures out there that are primarily oral, that use drum beats, or I don't know if anybody's using smoke signals these days, but I think there are still some cultures, perhaps in Africa and Australia, that drum beats and calls and oral means are the primary means of communication. Okay, what caused urbanization? Louder.
Industrial Revolution.
Okay, the Industrial Revolution. What caused the Industrial Revolution? Come on, y'all had history classes. Or what was the Industrial Revolution? I'll turn it around that way. History department, I hope you're watching this. Okay. The creation of factories, of mass production, of assembly lines. Okay, there's probably more to it than that. But the need to the invention, the technological changes that made mass production possible. So then what happened in the Industrial Revolution? To all these people that were living out in little houses on the prairie, what did they do? Okay, they all moved to the city. Why? To work in the factories, to have better jobs, they thought. And maybe so. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. To make more money, to have more secure positions. Okay? And so we changed as a society from agrarian to urban. And with that came all the ramifications of urbanization. And we're not going to explore all of that today because we're not a sociology class or a history class. But we're looking at how these revolutions in technology have impacted us and consequently have influenced the way that we communicate. Okay, remember we said way back lecture 1 that a good theory has heuristic value, that it generates research. Okay, well some of the research that's generated in the field of mass communication, some of the research questions that have been explored and that are providing ongoing research. Researchers try to define and discover how audiences are affected. And they may look at information, public, political issues, how do political campaigns of one sort or another influence people. Remember the famous Kennedy-Nixon debates? I know you weren't around, but surely you read about them. How were those audiences affected by those debates? How were those different from any other debate in history? They were televised. Okay, how did televising them make a difference? More people saw them. What else?
It provides a human touch because they
Talk
can.
a little louder and hold your mic down.
It provides a human touch because they can identify a face or a person with the message.
Okay, there was a human element to it because they had a face to go with the voice and the name much earlier on. What had people had to go on before that? Okay, the radio campaigns, and so they had voices, they had issues. Okay, what do analysts say made the difference in the fact that Kennedy won over Nixon in that debate? Okay, the girls are all saying he was better looking. All right, folks who watched it on television, which seemed to be the predominant part of the audience, opted for Kennedy. Now there were discussions of the 5 o'clock shadow beard on Nixon, how the color of the suit impacted with the background and this sort of thing. But analysts who listened to this debate on tape, or equivalent to over radio, people who heard it on radio, in many instances believed that Nixon won the debates because they were listening to the content. They were listening, I don't know how much voice patterns had an influence, but those who did not have it on visual opted in many instances for Nixon. Those who had it on visual as well as audio supported Kennedy. Okay. Well, anyway, it's a research orientation, a mass media area of study to look at these things, and the whole area of impression management and the making of political characters and so forth is a whole new thing that we get into now because of the visual impact of television. But anyway, how does the media affect information? How does it affect public and political issues? Okay, how does the media structure our realities? Can you think of any way that the media has structured your reality? Structured your view of the world?
When there's a lot of violence, people think that the world itself or society is violent.
Okay, it may well be that if you watch a lot of news and a lot of violent reports, and I think one of the last definitions that you have in your study guide is that mean world syndrome, which we'll come back to. But, you can start to think of the world as a pretty bad place if all you hear is the negative news. Okay, how else might your reality be structured, though?
The way you should look, the way people think the accepted way to be.
Okay, the expectation of how you should look when you go to work, when you're in a social event. Yeah, lots of money on marketing and advertising.
Or just in general, like how Hollywood is like anorexic and skinny, and like that's quote unquote the way beautiful people are. And
okay, yeah, to the extent there's the projection of the Hollywood image as reality, and she's saying the anorexic look, when in fact, just the other day there was something about an extra 20% of Texans are now overweight or something. By and large, we've got a really chubby society, if not downright fat. But what's your reality? And a lot of it's defined by media. Okay. So how you perceive violence, how you perceive beautiful people, but also things like the Learning Channel, Discovery. There's a perception of reality that you get from watching that kind of programming too, that you learn about life in the outback, or you learn about different kinds of animals and wildlife and so forth in the depths of Africa. There's an expansion to your reality, a shaping of that reality. But some of you live in the world of sports, and that's your reality. And you know the starting lineup for every major team and whatever. I'm useless there. But that's a kind of reality to live within that and so forth. Okay, role expectations of self and others, that kind of ties into what was just being mentioned. But what do you expect of yourself? What do we expect of ourselves as Texans? What do we expect of ourselves as Americans, as citizens of the earth, or whatever? And a lot of times the media has shaped that for us. And that's an area of research that one could go into. Okay, another area of research may be the acquisition of political attitudes and behaviors. Every year that there's a major, every 4 years when there's a major political campaign, that comes more into focus than it does in off years. But how are the voters perceiving that, we get so many polls that every week popularity is being measured and it's up or it's down or whatever. But that takes research to determine those things. Okay, and also the use of leisure time, how the media affects our leisure time. And we'll get into uses and dependency theory and needs gratification theory and so forth. But the media plays a large part in defining how we spend our leisure time, whether that leisure time is spent in front of the television set, whether it's spent listening to CDs, whether it's spent taking trips to places that the media has told us we should go to. There are all kinds of vacation spots on the earth that I wouldn't even know were there if the media hadn't shown me what a neat place that could be to travel and so on. Okay, another important area of research is antisocial behavior, aggression, violence, prejudice. We had the observation a few minutes ago that the media may cause us to view the world as a mean place. Still, the studies go on trying to determine what the link, if any, is between aggression in children and what? Television, but what on television? The violence on television. The violence in what on television? Cartoons, okay, and other programming. But particularly, most of us grew up on Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, and that was pretty violent. And I don't think we're messed up. I may be crazier than I think I am. But so what is the difference between having a coyote and a roadrunner, a coyote that keeps getting blown up every week at the movies or whatever, versus Power Rangers and I can't even name all the current characters, but these characters that are just kicking and bopping the garbage out of each other, does it make a difference? Well, a lot of people think it does. I know a number of moms who restrict the cartoon viewing and restrict the types of cartoons and so forth. I've seen one limited study that suggests that the whole exposure to media contributes to ADD in children. Now, it didn't have a big research base, so I'm not saying that the link is clearly there. I think many school teachers would agree that certainly your generation growing up with the media exposure that you've had, the stimulation of electronic video games and those things, makes it really hard for somebody just doing straight lecturing to hold your attention. You want PowerPoint, you want graphics, you want movement, you want things at your own pace and control, which is part of why we videotaped this class, so that you can do it at your leisure and have color and graphics and action and animation and things to go with it. And I have to admit, I'm with you on this. It's a lot more fun to play, and I won't tell you what they are, but to play my favorite video games than it is to sit there for an hour and listen to somebody just talk to me. And why is that? Well, there are lots of attention factors. Things that hold our attention are things like action and movement and color and suspense and challenge, and we could go on with probably a list of 20 or 30 things. And you get more of those things in a good video game in 5 minutes than you do in most lectures in a week. And, gee, it just makes them more fun, doesn't it? Okay, I'm not sure you've learned anything, though, from those video games, except maybe how to play the game better, which has limited value in life. But anyway, looking at the research, and particularly at antisocial behavior or negative effects, such as ADD or aggressiveness and so forth. But you can also do research to say what kind of pro-social behavior is generated by the media. Can you think of any? Does the media do anything good for us?
Well, they had the charity drives.
Okay, the blood drives. Think of all the stuff that went on during the flood. People got out and helped the Red Cross, and they served food. They saw the need, and they responded to it. And this was a case where the media did a wonderful job of promoting pro-social behavior. Okay? I can't watch all three networks at the same time, but one that I was watching more than the other two had, at the last time I listened, had raised, with the cooperation of the people of the Houston area, over $5 million. You know, now on an average day, we don't dig down in our pocket and say, oh, I think I'll give some money to the Red Cross or the food bank or whatever. So that was a case where pro-social behavior, cooperation, altruism, those things were promoted by the media. And it didn't take any sophisticated research to discover that. Now you could look for overall trends to see if those made a difference, or you know, you could look for other areas of that. Okay, motor and cognitive skills. How has the media, if they have they enhanced motor and cognitive skills? What did you watch when you were a little kid that was good for you? Sesame Street. All right. We've got a generation or several of Americans who grew up on Sesame Street. And chances are, what did you learn on Sesame Street? Your alphabet, your numbers, colors, sharing. Okay. Yeah, some of those basic things that you're supposed to know by the time you get in kindergarten. Okay. But how to be nice to people, how to respond in certain situations. Yeah, so that was a very important. Okay, as adults, does the media do anything for your motor and cognitive skills?
C-SPAN.
Okay, C-SPAN, good. I didn't hear you. The History Channel. Discover Channel. WebCT. Yeah, all you folks that are getting your degrees by distance ed. Yeah, yes. All right. So motor and cognitive skills, there's a lot of good stuff going on too. Okay, agenda setting, and we'll see this term again later on, but agenda setting refers to how the media tells us what's important. Okay, can you think of some ways they do that?
When they break through like a show and
okay,
like
breaking news.
Special
report. Okay, that says this is a top priority right here. And many of these things we wouldn't know about if the media didn't tell us. How would we know if a plane shot down on the other side of the world? You know, in colonial days it took weeks or sometimes months for a letter to get from England to America. You know, but breaking news. We should contrast gatekeeping with agenda setting, because those two terms are similar and yet they're different. If you think of information being held back by gates, like a dam holds back water, well, when you open the gates, the information flows through. And so media serves a gatekeeping function in that, and it goes back to this absolute distributed notion that we were talking about earlier today. There's all this information in the world. You know, there's stuff going on in France and England and Australia and wherever. And only some of that gets through to us. Here in Texas, you know, there's all kinds of things that are happening in Washington State or New York State or Florida or whatever. But what they let through to us is what's more important in the media's opinion, more important to Texans, more important to Houstonians. So certain information gets through the gates and other information is held back, and that's that gatekeeping notion. Well then, if you look at what actually got through the gates, it has to be prioritized. You know, stuff just comes in off the Associated Press and teletypes and faxes, randomly, chronologically, and so forth. And news editors and station managers and whoever's in charge of what, they have to look at that and say, okay, this is in, that's out, this is in, that's out. And out of all of this stuff, this is more important. And so just like you set an agenda at a business meeting and you say the first order of business is and the second order of business is, and sometimes you only have 6 items on the order of business, and other times you may have 25 or 30. Well, what are you going to put first? The most important or the least important? Okay, well, at least in terms of media, you're going to put the most important. Now, that wasn't a really good question because sometimes in meeting management, you want to put a few less important things there if you know your people are typically late. But you almost always put last the things that are least important, unless you only have 3 things and you want to save the biggie controversial for the finish line. But the media will put first that agenda item that's the most important. And how do you know it, besides being first, how do you know it's the most important?
Just say it's the top story.
Okay, they'll label it as their top story, as their news breaking story. They usually spend more time on it, too. Okay? So, but anyway, that's how the agenda is set. And they determine what will be talked about and which stories will be picked up from other states. The Amanda Yates story went nationwide because it was really gruesome and abnormal, so forth. And, well, we won't go there. Okay, where are we on this? Agenda. Okay, need satisfaction. We'll be looking at how the media satisfies certain needs. So I don't want to, for entertainment, diversity, information. We'll come back to that when we get to that specific theory. Okay. Might just reflect for a little bit on the social impact of the Internet. We kind of jumped to that already, but how it compares to literacy and urbanization. But I think probably we could agree that those are 3 really biggies in the history of the media. That the Internet and the information age has had just as much impact on us culturally as literacy did. And who knows when the printing press was invented? 1446? Okay. 1446. Urbanization occurred roughly when in this country? I think I heard it.
Late 1800s.
Okay, late 1800s, 1900, and then Henry Ford and all that. Okay, but these are 3 major impact areas, and we'll see those again as we get to Marshall McLuhan. Okay, I want to do very briefly some kind of historical perspectives with you, and these are not total rules of thumb thing, but because most of you weren't alive when a lot of this stuff was happening, well, this is our little thumbnail sketch, salute to history thing. When was TV invented? What are you saying, Anna? Yeah, I think they invented 30. When did it get marketed to the public? 50s. Okay, so late 40s, it's starting to filter out. Maybe one person on the block had a TV set, and if there was something really important going on, everybody'd go over to that house and watch it. Or I'm told that frequently in electronics shops, that sort of thing, that there would be a TV set maybe about the size of this little monitor up here on the desk, and they would turn them around in the windows so that as people walked by on the sidewalk, they could see this new, strange electronic device projecting pictures and so forth. Okay, so late 40s, but especially into the 50s. Well, there's been a considerable amount of debate on how much impact the media has had. And the consensus of scholars, and if you pick up some of the mass media textbooks, you can find these generalizations in there, that in the late 40s and the late 1960s, there was a powerful effect. The powerful effects model, as they called it, was in place. In the 1950s and early 60s, They called it a limited effects model. Now we're going to look at eventually, I'm not sure we'll get to it today, why the media sometimes has a lot of effect on people and other times people go, whatever, and just dismiss it. Okay, so kind of think about that as we work our way on into this unit, most of which we'll get to in the next class. But just think about that. Why would the media have a lot of effect on you sometimes and not so much effect other times? And once we reach the answer to that conclusion, then we'll see why in the 40s and the late 60s more effects seem to be occurring than occurred in the 50s and early 60s. Okay, in the 70s and again in the 90s, there were a lot of socialization effects. And, historians, media historians, popular culture theorists, and so forth, who've looked at this, recognize that there was a lot of socialization going on. Do you remember what was being socialized? Okay, well, think about that. Okay, when was World War I? Long ago. Okay, 1914, no TV then, but a lot of newspapers and radio. Okay, radio was an important medium at that point. Okay, World War II, 1941 to 45, for us at least. Okay, lots of studies of propaganda in that time period. From leaflets being dropped out of airplanes to messages over the radio. Okay, who remembers the name Kate Smith from anywhere? Got a clue who she was? Okay, a couple of people. Large woman who could sing marvelously. Sang, is most famous probably for God Bless America. Could just belt that out and you could, probably hear it for a mile without a microphone. Well, they used Kate Smith singing God Bless America to sell war bonds. And it worked. Okay? And that's an example of propaganda in the positive sense of the term. But anyway, it was a media effect that occurred at that time. Everybody familiar with Orson Welles, War of the Worlds, people jumping out of buildings, committing suicide because they believed the broadcast was real. Okay, another media effect. Okay, ever heard of Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats? Okay, good. All right, we're getting some history connection here now. We've got a response on that one. Okay, when did those occur? Why did they occur? Why was he talking to the people? Okay, to ease people about the war. He had this I've heard tapes of his voice. University of Texas has a great audio library with speech tapes of different folks. And I've heard some of those tapes, a very soothing, fatherly kind of tone. And so people would gather around their radios, I think on Sunday evenings, and listen to FDR chat with them about the state of the country and the well-being of the society, and to be updated on information, but also to be, in large part, reassured about things. Okay, Leave It to Beaver. Totally different phenomenon, right? Anybody not see a Leave It to Beaver sometime? Okay. Fun stuff, a portrait, perhaps overdone, of society in the 50s, but a different picture, a different relationship, a different content. The Ed Sullivan Show, everybody's seen those in rerun. A whole new era in television and of creating stars over, where would Elvis have been without Ed? Of course, there was Lawrence Welk, too, and all his little groupie, But this was a totally different type of historical phenomenon that was taking place. The Kennedy-Nixon debates we've already talked about. The Persian Gulf War. Think how different that is in terms of media exposure from all of these other things we've talked about. I mean, did you ever think that you would see a war start? That the bombing of Baghdad would be brought to you live by CNN from the roof of a hotel? You know, bizarre. Just a totally different kind of phenomenon. Okay, kind of as a parting thought for today, and then we'll get into some actual theoretical approaches next time. How do you decide which channel to watch when you turn on the TV? Now, don't pack up on me yet. Just think about that for a second. How do you decide which, I'm not going to ask you to answer me today, but I really want you to think about this, and this is where we're going to start next time. When you click that, of course, it's probably preset to the right channel to start with, but, you know, what channel do you watch when you turn on the TV and why, and what makes you change that channel? And next time we'll get into the theoretical explanations for why you do that. Have a good one.